The first thing people noticed was the child. She was small enough to still fit against her father's shoulder, one cheek pressed into the gray cotton of his hoodie, one hand curled around the neck of a stuffed bear that had clearly survived more than one washing machine and more than one difficult night. Her eyes were half open, half closed, the way children look when sleep is trying to pull them under, but the world keeps getting louder. The second thing people noticed was the father. He was tall, black, broad through the shoulders, dressed in worn jeans, plain sneakers, and a hoodie that looked like it had been folded into the same carry-on bag 3 times too many. He did not look poor exactly. He looked tired. He looked ordinary. He looked like a man who had carried too much through too many airports and had reached the end of what the night should have asked from him. The third thing people noticed was the manager standing in front of him. Richard Hale stood with his suit jacket buttoned, his chin slightly raised, and 2 hotel security guards positioned just behind him like punctuation at the end of a sentence he had already decided was final. "Sir," Richard said, loud enough that the people near the lounge could hear him, "I've already explained this to you. This is a private luxury property. We cannot have people simply walking in off the street and occupying the lobby." The lobby of the Belmont Grand went quiet in layers. First, the bartender stopped polishing a glass. Then, the couple by the elevator stopped speaking. Then the woman seated beneath the gold chandelier lowered her phone and looked up completely. Even the soft piano music coming from the speakers seemed suddenly too delicate for the room it was in. The little girl lifted her head from her father's shoulder. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice small but clear enough to travel. "Why are they making us leave?" The father looked down at her first. Not at the manager. Not at the guards. At her. "You didn't do anything wrong, Naomi," he said quietly. Then he looked back at Richard Hale. He did not raise his voice. He did not puff out his chest. He did not say what men in his position were expected to say in moments like this. He did not ask if Richard knew who he was. He simply reached into the pocket of his hoodie, took out his phone, and made one call. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. "I'm in the Belmont lobby," he said. "Bring Thomas downstairs. Now." Then he ended the call and put the phone away. Richard almost smiled. "Calling someone is not going to change hotel policy," he said. The father's expression did not move. "I know the policy," he answered. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened, and Thomas Webb, regional director of Carter Hospitality Group, stepped into the lobby wearing the face of a man who had just learned that the floor beneath him was no longer solid. He walked directly past Richard, past the front desk, past the security guards, and stopped in front of the man in the gray hoodie. "Mr. Carter," Thomas said, his voice low and strained, "I am so sorry. We had no idea you were coming tonight." Richard's face changed before anyone said another word, because the man he had just ordered out of the lobby did not merely have a reservation. He owned the hotel. If you believe people should never be judged by how they look, like this video, subscribe, and comment your city below so we know where you're watching from. Elliot Carter had not planned to stop at the Belmont Grand that night. If the flight from London had landed on time, if the bags had arrived when they were supposed to, if Naomi had not slept through dinner and woken up crying somewhere over the Atlantic because her ears hurt and her bear had slipped under the seat, he would have driven straight home. Their house was 40 minutes outside the city, past the old courthouse, past the row of sycamore trees that lined the road into the neighborhood. He knew the drive well enough to make it half asleep, but knowing a road was not the same as being safe on it. By the time they reached the parking garage, it was nearly midnight. Rain had started falling in thin silver lines across the windshield, and Naomi had fallen asleep again before he finished buckling her into the back seat of the hired car. She had one hand wrapped around Captain Bear, the other curled into the sleeve of Elliot's hoodie, holding on even in sleep as though she could feel the distance of the last 3 months, and did not intend to let him disappear again. Elliot sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. He looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror, 8 years old, missing one front tooth, hair braided neatly by his sister before the trip, though half the braids had loosened somewhere between Heathrow and baggage claim. She had her mother's eyes, which was both a comfort and a wound depending on the hour. Tonight, it was mostly a comfort. She was home. She was safe. She was with him. That was supposed to be enough. But he was exhausted in a way that made his bones feel hollow, and the thought of driving through rain with a sleeping child in the back seat felt like pride pretending to be responsibility. Elliot had learned, late but thoroughly, that a man raising a child alone did not get to confuse stubbornness with strength. So he made the decision. They would stay in the city for one night. Hot shower, clean sheets, breakfast in the morning, then home. He knew exactly where to go. The Belmont Grand stood on Fifth Avenue, 32 stories of glass, limestone, and old money confidence rising above the theater district like it had always belonged there. It was the flagship property of Carter Hospitality Group, the hotel that business magazines photographed when they wanted to explain how Elliot Carter had turned a failing three-property chain into one of the most respected independent luxury hotel brands in the country. He had opened the Belmont himself 6 years earlier. He remembered standing in the lobby on ribbon-cutting day, surrounded by executives, city officials, journalists, and employees in fresh uniforms. He remembered the smell of new wood and flowers. He remembered his hand tightening around the small photograph he kept in his inside pocket, a picture of his mother standing outside the motel where she had cleaned rooms for 27 years. Her name had been Lorraine Carter, though most guests had never asked. She had changed sheets for people who left money on nightstands and complaints at the front desk. She had scrubbed bathrooms in rooms where businessmen stepped around her without looking down. She had come home with swollen feet and a smile she saved for her children because she refused to give strangers the last good part of herself. Elliot's father, James, had worked nights in maintenance at another hotel across town. He fixed broken air conditioners, leaking sinks, jammed service elevators, and whatever else wealthy guests expected to be repaired before they noticed inconvenience had entered the room. He wore the same navy work shirt for years, patched at both elbows, his name stitched above the pocket in white thread. Elliot had grown up inside the back corridors of hotels. Not the lobbies, not the ballrooms. The corridors behind kitchens, the employee entrances, the laundry rooms heavy with steam, the basement offices where tired people ate from plastic containers during 15-minute breaks. He learned early that every luxury building had a hidden spine made of people nobody was supposed to see. He also learned that the front door did not open the same way for everyone. That was why he built Carter Hospitality Group around one rule, repeated so often during training that some employees could recite it from memory. Dignity before status. Not after a credit card cleared. Not after a guest's name appeared on a VIP list. Not after someone recognized a watch, a last name, an accent, or a title. Before. Every person who walked through the door was to be greeted like they belonged there until their behavior proved otherwise. It was not marketing language to Elliot. It was personal history written into company policy. And yet, Elliot almost never announced himself when he visited his properties. He did not travel with an entourage. He did not call ahead unless business required it. He did not wear tailored suits when he wanted to see the truth. He came in quietly, sometimes through the main entrance, sometimes through the garage, sometimes wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, because his father had once told him something he had never forgotten. A place shows you what it really is when it thinks nobody important is watching. Tonight, nobody was supposed to be watching. Tonight, he was not coming as founder, owner, or chairman. He was just a tired father carrying his sleeping daughter through the rain, looking for one room in a hotel built on the promise that no one like him would ever be made to feel small inside it. The revolving doors of the Belmont Grand moved slowly, almost silently, turning Elliot and Naomi out of the wet midnight air and into a lobby designed to make exhaustion feel temporary. Warm light poured from the chandeliers overhead. Tall arrangements of white orchids stood on polished tables. The marble floor reflected everything softly, as though the whole room had been built to flatter whoever entered it. Somewhere near the bar, a piano recording played low enough to seem expensive. A few guests sat scattered through the lounge in small islands of conversation, their voices quiet, their glasses catching the light. Elliot paused just inside the entrance, adjusting Naomi's weight against a shoulder. She made a small sound in her sleep and tightened her hold around Captain Bear. "I know," he murmured. "Almost done." He crossed the lobby without hurry. Not because he was trying to look confident. Not because he wanted anyone to notice him. He moved carefully because a sleeping child changes the way a man occupies space. Every step becomes slower. Every motion becomes softer. The world narrows down to the small body, trusting yours not to let it fall. At the front desk, a young clerk looked up from his computer. His name tag read Derek. He was in his late 20s, clean-shaven, neatly dressed, with a kind of professional smile that had been practiced in mirrors and training rooms. For half a second, the smile appeared automatically. Then Derek's eyes moved over Elliot. The hoodie, the jeans, the sneakers damp from the rain, the tired child on his shoulder, the small carry-on bag hanging from his free hand. The smile did not disappear completely. It changed into something thinner, something careful. It stayed on his face because company policy required it, but the warmth went out of it before he spoke. "Good evening," Derek said. "Good evening," Elliot replied. "I need a room for tonight. One night, 2 guests. Standard is fine." Derek looked at the computer screen. His fingers touched the keyboard but did not really move. Elliot noticed that. He noticed everything. Not because he was looking for trouble, but because years of walking into rooms where people underestimated him had taught him to read the small things first. Derek glanced once at Naomi, then back at Elliot. "I'm sorry, sir," he said. "We're fully booked tonight." Elliot stood still. The words did not surprise him. What surprised him was how quickly they arrived. Fully booked was possible on some nights. Conventions, weddings, citywide events, bad weather, holiday weekends. But Elliot had reviewed the occupancy forecast for the week from London 2 days earlier. The Belmont had been running strong, but not full. Unless a sudden group booking had arrived in the last 48 hours, there should have been rooms. He did not say that. Instead, he shifted Naomi slightly higher on his shoulder and kept his voice even. "Nothing at all?" Derek shook his head with polite finality. "No, sir. Unfortunately not." "A standard room is fine," Elliot said. "Doesn't need to be a suite. My daughter just needs to sleep." At the word daughter, Derek's eyes flicked to Naomi again. There was no softness in the look. No cruelty either, not exactly. Just calculation. The kind that made a person into a situation. "I understand," Derek said. "But, as I said, we have no availability. There are several hotels in the area that may be able to accommodate you." The sentence was professional. Every word could have survived an HR complaint by itself. But the meaning underneath it was not professional at all. Elliot heard it clearly. "Not here. Try somewhere else. Somewhere more appropriate." He looked at Derek for a long moment. Naomi's breath warmed the side of his neck. Rain ticked faintly against the glass beyond the front doors. "Could you check again?" Elliot asked. Derek's expression tightened by a fraction. "I have checked, sir." "No," Elliot said, still calm. "You looked at the screen. I'm asking you to check." That was the first moment Derek realized the man in front of him was not going to accept dismissal, simply because it had been delivered politely. His posture changed. His shoulders squared. The smile faded into something closer to managerial patience, though Derek was not the manager. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice, "this is a luxury property. We do maintain certain standards for guest experience, especially at this hour." Elliot's eyes did not leave his face. "What standard am I failing?" The question hung between them. Derek did not answer directly. People rarely did when forced to name the thing they were actually doing. "I'm simply explaining," Derek said, "that we may not be the best fit for your needs tonight." Behind Elliot, the revolving doors moved again. A couple entered laughing, quietly under one umbrella. The man wore a navy blazer over an open-collared shirt. The woman had a cream-colored coat draped over her shoulders and a small gold suitcase rolling behind her. They looked like people who had never once rehearsed what they would say if a front desk clerk questioned whether they belonged somewhere. Derek's face changed as soon as he saw them. The warmth returned instantly. "Good evening," he called past Elliot. "Welcome to the Belmont Grand." The couple approached the desk beside Elliot, close enough that the woman's perfume cut through the lobby air. The man gave Elliot a brief glance, not hostile, not friendly, simply registering an obstacle before turning his attention to Derek. Long night, the man said. Any chance you have a room? Derek smiled. Do you have a reservation with us? No, the woman said with a small apologetic laugh. We were supposed to stay with friends, but their guest room apparently became a storage unit while we were away. Derek laughed with them. Let me see what I can do. Elliot watched his fingers move across the keyboard this time. Actually move. Derek typed, clicked, scrolled, checked something on another screen, and within less than 2 minutes said, We do have a deluxe king available. I can place you on the 21st floor. The man handed over a credit card. Derek processed it. The printer behind the desk whispered. 2 key cards appeared. Derek placed them in a small black folder and slid it across the counter with both hands. Elevators are to your right. Breakfast begins at 6:30. Please let us know if there's anything else we can do to make your stay comfortable. Thank you, the woman said. Our pleasure, Derek replied. Elliot watched them walk away. He did not blink. He did not speak until the elevator doors closed behind them. Then he turned back to Derek. My daughter and I were told there were no rooms. Derek's face had gone carefully blank. That room had just become available. Elliot nodded once, slowly. Convenient. Derek's jaw moved. Sir, I'm going to ask that you lower your tone. Elliot almost looked around to see whose tone Derek was talking about. He had not raised his voice. He had not leaned across the desk. He had not done anything except repeat what had happened in front of both of them. Naomi stirred. Her eyelashes lifted. She looked around the lobby with the disoriented seriousness of a child waking somewhere unfamiliar. Daddy, she whispered. I'm here. Are we at the hotel? Yes, baby. Can we go to bed now? Elliot's hand came up to the back of her head, steady and gentle. In a minute. Derek looked uncomfortable now, though not in a way that led him toward kindness. It was the discomfort of a man whose clean little refusal had become messier than he intended. Elliot turned back to him. I'd like to speak with the manager on duty. Derek inhaled through his nose. Sir, the manager will tell you the same thing. Then I'd like to hear it from him. For a moment, Derek did not move. Then he picked up the desk phone and pressed a button. His voice changed when he spoke into it. Mr. Hale, I'm sorry to disturb you. I have a situation at the front desk. A situation. Elliot looked down at Naomi. Her head rested against his shoulder again, but her eyes were open now. She was watching Derek with quiet confusion, clutching Captain Bear under her chin. Elliot knew that look. It was the look children wore the first time they realized adults could make no sense and still be in charge. He wanted to tell her not to worry. He wanted to tell her this would be over soon. But Elliot had made it a rule never to lie to his daughter just because the truth was inconvenient. So he only held her closer and waited. The lobby continued around them, but differently now. A bartender was pretending not to watch. A woman near the lounge had stopped scrolling her phone. A bellman standing near the entrance looked from Elliot to Derek, and then quickly away. Nobody intervened. Nobody asked what was happening. Nobody wanted to step into the space between a tired black father and a polished hotel employee using policy as a locked door. 2 minutes later, Richard Hale appeared from a side hallway behind the front desk. He was exactly the kind of man who believed authority should be visible. Dark suit, silver tie, hair combed neatly back, shoes polished enough to reflect the lobby lights. He walked with measured impatience, not rushing, because rushing would suggest the situation had power over him. Derek leaned toward him and spoke quietly. Richard listened without looking at Elliot at first. That told Elliot everything. When Richard finally turned, his expression was already arranged into professional disappointment. Sir, he said, I understand there's been some confusion. Elliot shifted Naomi carefully and looked at him. There hasn't been any confusion, he said. Your clerk told me the hotel was full. Then he gave a room to 2 walk-in guests standing beside me. Richard did not look at Derek. He did not check the system. He did not ask a single question whose answer he did not already want. Instead, he folded his hands in front of him and said, Our staff is trained to exercise discretion in maintaining the standards of this property. Elliot felt Naomi's hand tighten around his sleeve. Standards, he said. Richard held his gaze. Yes, sir, he said. Standards. For a moment, neither man said anything. The word standard sat between them like something placed carefully on a table where everyone could see it, but no one wanted to touch it. Elliot looked at Richard Hale, then at Derek, then past them to the lobby he had helped design 6 years earlier. The Belmont Grand had been built around the idea of welcome. That was the word printed in the first employee handbook. That was the word engraved on a small plaque inside the staff training room upstairs. That was the word Elliot had used at the opening ceremony when he stood beneath these same chandeliers and promised his employees that luxury did not mean exclusion. Now he stood on the other side of his own front desk, holding his tired daughter, listening to a manager use the language of hospitality to disguise the shape of something much older. What standard did I fail? Elliot asked. Richard's face remained professionally still. Sir, this is not a productive conversation. It's a simple question. I'm not going to debate policy with you in the lobby. I'm not asking you to debate it, Elliot said. I'm asking you to explain why one walk-in guest was denied a room and another walk-in guest was welcomed. Richard's mouth tightened. Not enough for most people to notice. Enough for Elliot. Derek shifted behind the desk, suddenly very interested in the computer screen. Richard took half a step closer, lowering his voice in a way that made the insult feel more deliberate, not less. At this hour, with no reservation, limited luggage, and a child who appears to be asleep in your arms, my staff made a judgment call. Naomi lifted her head again. Her eyes moved from Richard to her father. Elliot felt that small movement more sharply than if Richard had put a hand on him. A judgment call, Elliot repeated. Yes. About my daughter? About the situation. Elliot's voice stayed quiet. My daughter is 8 years old. She has been on a plane for 7 hours. The situation is that she needs to sleep. Richard glanced at Naomi, then away, as though looking too long might require him to acknowledge her as a child instead of evidence. There are other properties nearby, he said. I would be happy to have Derek provide a list. That was the moment the room began to change. It was not dramatic. There was no gasp, no open confrontation, no heroic stranger stepping forward. Real rooms rarely behave that way at first. Instead, attention gathered slowly. A man at the bar turned his glass without drinking from it. A woman seated near the fireplace paused with her phone halfway to her purse. The bellman near the entrance stopped pretending to adjust the luggage cart. People were listening. Richard knew it too, and it irritated him. His smile returned, but now it had edges. Sir, he said, I'm going to ask you to take your daughter and leave the property. Naomi's fingers tightened around Captain Bear. Daddy, she whispered, are we in trouble? Elliot looked down at her. No, sweetheart. Did I do something? No. Richard exhaled softly through his nose, the sound of a man running out of patience with someone else's dignity. I understand this may be frustrating, he said, but we cannot have you standing here disturbing other guests. Elliot looked around the lobby. No one was disturbed until Richard decided they needed to be. I haven't raised my voice, Elliot said. I haven't threatened anyone. I asked for a room. I asked for an explanation. Now I'm asking for your full name and title. Richard blinked once. My name is Richard Hale. I am the night operations manager. Thank you. Elliot repeated it quietly, as if placing it somewhere permanent. Richard did not like that. Sir, you are now being asked to leave by management. And if I don't? The question was not aggressive. It was almost gentle. That made it worse for Richard, because it did not give him the confrontation he wanted. If you refuse, Richard said, I will have security escort you out. Naomi turned her face fully toward Richard now. Why? She asked. It was one word. Soft, honest, and devastatingly clear. Richard did not answer her. He looked at Elliot instead. That was its own answer. Elliot shifted Naomi down from his shoulder so she could stand beside him. She was unsteady for a second, still heavy with sleep, and he kept one hand on her back until she found her balance. Her little sneakers touched the marble floor. Captain Bear hung from one hand by the arm. She looked very small in that lobby. Smaller than the flowers. Smaller than the luggage carts. smaller than the polished desk, where grown men had decided she and her father were unsuitable. Elliot crouched slightly. "Stay close to me," he said. She nodded. Then he stood. Richard raised one hand toward the far side of the lobby. Two security guards stepped forward. They had been near the service hallway, waiting for the signal. One was older, thick through the shoulders, with tired eyes and a shaved head. The other was younger, taller, and trying hard to look like he had no opinion. They approached with the practiced caution of men who had been asked to remove people before and had learned to make their bodies do the talking first. The older guard stopped a few feet away from Elliot. "Sir," he said, not unkindly, "we're going to need you to come with us." Elliot looked at him. "What's your name?" The guard hesitated. "Samuel." "Samuel," Elliot said. "Has anyone told you what I did?" Samuel's eyes flicked to Richard. Richard answered for him. "You were asked to leave and refused." Elliot kept looking at Samuel. "That isn't what I asked." The guard's jaw shifted. He looked at Naomi, then back at Elliot. "No, sir," Samuel admitted. "I was just told assistance was needed." Richard's face hardened. "That's enough. Escort him out." The younger guard moved first, not touching Elliot yet, but stepping close enough to make the threat physical. Naomi shrank against her father's leg. Elliot's hand came down gently onto her shoulder. The lobby had gone almost silent now. Someone near the bar had lifted a phone. Not high, just angled enough to record. A woman by the fireplace was watching openly, her face caught between discomfort and shame. The bellman near the entrance stared at the floor like the marble had suddenly become fascinating. Elliot saw all of it. He saw the silence. He saw the fear. He saw the habit of looking away. He had seen it in hotels his parents worked in boardrooms where investors assumed he was an assistant, in restaurants where hosts asked if he was waiting for someone before asking if he had a reservation. It was always the same choreography. One person crossed the line. Others witnessed it. Everyone waited for someone else to be responsible. But tonight, Naomi was watching too. And that changed what silence cost. "Daddy," she said, barely above a whisper, "are they going to make us sleep outside?" The question landed harder than Richard expected. The younger guard stopped moving. Samuel looked away. Even Derek's eyes lifted from the screen. Elliot bent toward his daughter, just enough that his voice belonged to her first, and the room second. "No," he said. "We're not sleeping outside." Richard gave a short, humorless laugh. "Sir, you don't get to decide that." Elliot straightened. For the first time, something in his expression changed. Not anger, not threat. Something colder and more settled. The look of a man who had gathered enough information and no longer needed to ask what kind of room he was standing in. He reached into his hoodie pocket and took out his phone. Richard watched him with open impatience. "If you're calling the police, that is your choice," he said. "But I assure you, they will be told you were trespassing on private property." Elliot did not respond. He unlocked the phone, found the number, and pressed call. The ring seemed louder than it should have been. When the person answered, Elliot spoke 4 sentences. "Thomas, I'm in the Belmont lobby. Bring HR and security leadership downstairs now. Do not call ahead to the desk." He listened for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. Now." He ended the call. Richard folded his arms. Calling someone is not going to change hotel policy. Elliot looked at him. "I know the policy." There was something in the way he said it that made Derek look up sharply. Richard missed it. He was too deep inside his own certainty. "Then you should also know," Richard said, "that management reserves the right to refuse service. Not for this. For any reason deemed necessary to preserve the safety and comfort of our guests." Elliot looked around the lobby again. "Our guests," he repeated. Richard stepped closer. "Yes, our guests." Naomi pressed Captain Bear to her chest with both hands. The elevator chimed. It was a small sound, ordinary and clean, one the lobby produced hundreds of times a day without consequence. But this time every head turned toward it. The doors opened. Thomas Webb stepped out first. He was 61, silver-haired, usually composed to the point of severity. Tonight his tie was slightly crooked and his expression was not composed at all. Behind him came Angela Morris from Human Resources, still pulling on her blazer and Victorchin, Director of Internal Security, his phone already in his hand. Thomas saw Elliot immediately. Then he saw Naomi. Then he saw the guards. Whatever color remained in his face drained away. He crossed the lobby quickly, not running, but close enough that everyone understood he wanted to. Richard turned, confused by the urgency. "Mr. Webb," he began, "I was just handling." Thomas walked past him as if Richard had not spoken. He stopped in front of Elliot Carter and lowered his head slightly. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice tight with alarm, "I am so sorry. We had no idea you were coming tonight." For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then the silence changed shape. Richard looked from Thomas to Elliot. Derek's hands went still on the counter. Samuel took 1 step back. Naomi looked up at her father, then at Thomas. "Daddy," she whispered, "why does he know your name?" Elliot did not answer right away. Thomas turned slowly toward the room, and when he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the lobby. "This is Elliot Carter," he said, "founder and sole owner of Carter Hospitality Group." He paused, letting the words find every person who had watched without speaking. "He owns the Belmont Grand." The words did not land all at once. They moved through the lobby slowly, touching each person in a different place. At the bar, the man who had been recording lowered his phone by an inch. Near the fireplace, the woman with the purse covered her mouth with her fingers. The bellman by the entrance looked up from the marble floor as though the building itself had suddenly spoken. Derek looked like someone had taken the air out of the room and left him standing inside it. Richard Hale did not move. For several seconds, he remained exactly where he was, one hand still half raised from the gesture he had made toward security, his expression frozen in the last shape it had held before reality changed. Then his eyes shifted to Elliot's hoodie, to Naomi's bear, to the damp sneakers, to the plain carry-on bag, and finally back to Thomas Webb. "No," Richard said quietly. It was not an argument. Not yet. It was the sound of a man trying to reject a fact before it reached him fully. Thomas looked at him. "Excuse me." Richard swallowed. He stopped, started again. "Mr. Webb, there must be some misunderstanding. This gentleman never identified himself." Elliot looked at him then, not with triumph, not with anger, not with the satisfaction Richard might have expected from a man who had just watched the entire power structure of the room reverse in his favor. Elliot looked at him the way a person looks at damage after a storm, not surprised by its existence, only measuring how far it reached. "You're right," Elliot said. "I didn't." Richard's shoulders loosened by a fraction, as if that single admission might save him. Elliot continued. "That was the point." The room was quiet enough that Naomi's small sniffle carried. Elliot felt it more than heard it. He looked down. His daughter was standing close against his leg, Captain Bear pressed under her chin, her eyes moving between the adults with the tense concentration of a child trying to understand whether danger had ended or simply changed costumes. He placed one hand gently on the back of her head. Then he looked back at Richard. "You didn't know who I was," Elliot said. "So you treated me exactly the way you believed you were allowed to treat a man who looked like me walking in here at midnight with a tired child and a small bag." Richard opened his mouth. "Mr. Carter, with respect, that is not." "No," Elliot said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The word cut cleanly through Richard's sentence and left it unfinished. "You don't get to dress this up now. Not in policy language. Not in guest experience language. Not in standards. You had available rooms. Your clerk told me there were none. Then he gave one to a couple who walked in behind me without a reservation. When I asked why, you backed him without checking a thing." Derek lowered his head. Richard looked toward Thomas, then Angela from HR, then Victor from security, searching for the version of authority that had always stood behind him before. No one moved toward him. Elliot shifted his gaze to Derek. "Pull up the availability report." Derek blinked. "Sir." "The availability report," Elliot said. "Now." Derek's fingers trembled as they moved across the keyboard. The printer behind the desk clicked once. A page slid out slowly, almost politely, as if it did not understand the weight of what it carried. Derek handed it to Thomas. Thomas read it and his jaw tightened. Angela stepped closer and looked over his shoulder. "How many open rooms?" Elliot asked. Thomas looked at Derek, then at Richard, then back to Elliot. 17, he said. The number moved through the lobby like a second reveal. 17. Not one room that had just opened unexpectedly. Not one cancellation. 17 rooms. Elliot nodded once, almost to himself. Then he turned to Derek. "You told me this hotel was fully booked." Derek's lips parted, but nothing came out. Elliot waited. That was worse than if he had demanded an answer. The waiting made Derek stand inside his own choice without the protection of noise. Finally, Derek said, "I was following the manager's expectations." Richard turned sharply. "Derek." Derek flinched, but kept his eyes down. Elliot watched both of them. "There it is," he said quietly. Angela folded her hands in front of her, her face unreadable in the practiced way of someone who had spent years listening to people reveal more than they intended. Elliot looked back at Richard. "Your expectations." Richard's face flushed. "I maintain standards for this property," he said, but the sentence came out weaker now, less like authority and more like a man repeating a prayer he no longer believed would work. "Standards," Elliot said. "Let's talk about that word." He turned slightly, not to perform for the room, but because the room had become part of what happened. Every person in it had watched the first half. They needed to hear the rest. "When I built this company, I wrote one sentence at the top of the first training manual. Dignity before status. Some of you have seen it on the wall upstairs. Some of you probably walked past it 100 times without thinking about it. But it was not decoration. It was not branding. It was the reason this place existed." His voice remained calm, but something under it carried. "My mother cleaned rooms in hotels where guests did not learn her name. My father fixed pipes and broken locks in buildings where people looked through him unless something stopped working. They spent their lives making luxury possible for people who would have called security if they sat too long in the lobby." Naomi looked up at him. She had heard pieces of these stories before, never here, never like this. Elliot's hand rested on her shoulder. "I built the Belmont Grand because I believed a beautiful place did not have to be a cruel place. I believed luxury could have manners. I believed the first thing a person received at the door should be respect, not inspection." No one spoke. Even the piano music had stopped, or perhaps someone, behind the bar, had finally turned it off. Elliot looked at Richard again. "You failed that tonight." Richard's jaw worked. "Mr. Carter, I made a mistake. I can see that now. But termination over one incident." "One incident?" Elliot asked. The gentleness in his voice made Richard stop. Elliot turned to Victor. "Pull the last 90 days of denial logs. I want names, timestamps, reasons, and camera review attached to every one. I want guest complaints cross-checked. I want security removals reviewed. And I want every incident involving discretionary refusal flagged by tomorrow afternoon." Victor nodded once. "Yes, sir." Richard's face went pale again, but differently this time. Not shock. Recognition. Elliot saw it. So did Angela. So did Thomas. This had not been one incident. It had been one incident witnessed by the wrong person. If this story has you watching closely, hit like, subscribe, and comment your city below, because moments like this happen everywhere. Elliot let the silence sit for a moment before continuing. "Richard Hale," he said, "your employment with Carter Hospitality Group ends tonight, effective immediately." Richard stared at him. Whatever argument rose in him did not make it out of his mouth. Perhaps it was the room. Perhaps it was the 17 open rooms printed on a sheet in Thomas Webb's hand. Perhaps it was Naomi standing there with a stuffed bear, still close enough to hear every word. Or perhaps, somewhere beneath the panic, Richard understood that the sentence had been coming from the moment he used the word standards and expected it to protect him. Angela stepped forward. "Mr. Hale, I'll need your hotel keys and access card." Richard looked at her as if she were speaking another language. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and handed them over. The keys made a small sound in Angela's palm. It was not loud. It was enough. Richard straightened his suit jacket, an old reflex of dignity arriving too late to change the facts. For a moment, Elliot thought he might apologize. Not because it would save him, but because there are moments when a person reaches the edge of themselves and has one last chance to tell the truth. Richard looked at Naomi. Then he looked away. "I'll collect my things," he said. Angela nodded. "I'll accompany you." They walked toward the side hallway together. No one watched more obviously than they already had to. That was a mercy the room granted him without being asked, though he had offered very little mercy himself. When Richard disappeared from sight, Derek was still behind the desk. He looked younger now. Not innocent, just young. Elliot walked to the counter. Derek did not step back, but his body wanted to. Elliot could see it in the way his fingers pressed against the wood. "You made a choice tonight," Elliot said. Derek swallowed. "Yes, sir. Not because you were confused. Not because the system was wrong. Not because there were no rooms. You looked at me, looked at my daughter, and decided we were not the kind of people this hotel should welcome." Derek's eyes shone, but Elliot did not soften the sentence for him. Some truths had to be heavy enough to be remembered. "I'm sorry," Derek said, and the words came out rough. "I know that doesn't fix it." "No," Elliot said. "It doesn't." Derek lowered his head. Elliot studied him for a moment. "I'm not firing you tonight." Derek looked up, startled. "But you are suspended pending review. If you come back, it will not be because you learned how to say the right words in a training room. It will be because you understand that hospitality is not deciding who deserves welcome. It is offering welcome before you know who someone is." Derek nodded once, quickly, then again more slowly. "Yes, sir." Elliot turned away from him and looked toward the concierge station. A young woman stood there motionless, hands flat on the counter. Her name tag read Maya. She had watched the whole thing with the expression of someone who had recognized wrong immediately and then been trapped inside the machinery that made silence feel safer. Elliot walked over. Maya's shoulders tightened. He stopped in front of her and lowered his voice. "You saw what was happening." She nodded barely. "Yes, sir." "You knew it was wrong." Her eyes filled before she could stop them. "Yes, sir." "Why didn't you say anything?" Maya took a breath that shook. "Because Richard would have made sure I regretted it." Elliot looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "That is a leadership failure," he said. "Not a character failure." Maya blinked. Elliot continued. "But tomorrow that changes. You're moving into acting guest services supervisor while we review this property. I need someone near the front who still knows what wrong looks like before a report tells them." Maya stared at him. "I won't let you down," she said. "I know," Elliot replied. Then Naomi tugged gently on his sleeve. "Daddy." He looked down. "Can we go to bed now?" For the first time that night, Elliot's face softened completely. "Yes, baby," he said. "Now we can go to bed." Thomas Webb personally walked Elliot and Naomi to the elevator. No one spoke for the first few seconds. The lobby had become one of those rooms where sound returned slowly after something serious happened, one careful movement at a time. A guest lifted a glass and set it back down without drinking. The bartender restarted the music, then seemed to think better of it and turned the volume lower. Derek stood behind the desk with his eyes fixed on the computer screen, though Elliot knew he was not reading anything on it. Naomi leaned against her father's side, Captain Bear tucked beneath one arm, her small hand wrapped around Elliot's fingers. When the elevator doors opened, Thomas stepped aside. "The presidential suite is ready," he said quietly. "Housekeeping is sending up fresh linens and a light meal." "I know that doesn't undo tonight." "No," Elliot said. "It doesn't." Thomas nodded, accepting the correction without defense. Elliot looked back across the lobby once before stepping inside. The chandeliers were still beautiful. The flowers were still perfect. The marble still shone. Nothing visible had changed, and yet everything had. A building could look exactly the same from one minute to the next, and still become a different place because the truth had finally been spoken inside it. Naomi waited until the elevator doors closed before asking the question. "Daddy." "Yes, baby." "Do you really own this hotel?" Elliot looked down at her. Her face was serious, not impressed. Children had a way of receiving impossible information and placing it beside practical concerns. To Naomi, Owning a hotel mattered less than whether the bed would be soft and whether breakfast had pancakes. "Yes," he said. "I do." She looked at the elevator buttons, glowing gold. "Then why didn't you just tell them?" Elliot was quiet for a moment. The elevator rose smoothly, carrying them above the lobby, above the front desk, above the place where his daughter had been made to wonder if she had done something wrong simply by standing beside him. "Because people should treat you right before they know what you own," he said. Naomi considered that. "So if you didn't own it, they still should have been nice?" "Especially then." She nodded slowly, filing the answer away in that private place children keep the truths they are not finished understanding yet. The suite was larger than they needed. Naomi noticed that immediately. The living room had tall windows overlooking the rain-glossed city, a dining table set with fruit and warm bread, and a bedroom where the bed looked almost impossibly white. She walked in holding Captain Bear with both hands, stopped at the doorway, and looked back at her father. "Are we allowed to sleep here?" The question hit him harder than he expected. Elliot crouched in front of her. "Yes," he said. "We are allowed." Her face relaxed, not all at once, but enough. She climbed into the bed without changing clothes, still clutching the bear, and was asleep within 3 minutes. Elliot sat beside her until her breathing evened out. Then he stood by the window and looked down at the city he had spent most of his life trying to climb without forgetting where he started. His phone buzzed repeatedly. Thomas, Angela, Victor, board members, legal, communications. Elliot ignored all of them for 10 minutes. For 10 minutes, he was only a father watching his daughter sleep safely in a room she should never have had to question whether she deserved. By morning, the story had already begun to move. Not because Elliot released a statement. He did not. Not because he wanted attention. He did not. But 3 guests had recorded pieces of what happened. And by sunrise, short clips were circulating online. A black father in a hoodie. A luxury hotel manager telling him to leave. A child asking if they had done something wrong. Then the regional director stepping out of the elevator and calling that same man Mr. Carter. By noon, the full story was everywhere. The headline changed depending on who posted it, but the shape stayed the same. Single father thrown out of luxury hotel he owned. Elliot disliked the simplicity of it. The internet liked clean villains and perfect heroes, and Elliot did not trust either category. Richard had done harm, but Richard had not created himself alone. Derek had lied, but Derek had learned the lie inside a culture that rewarded it until the wrong person noticed. The lobby had stayed silent, but silence was often what people chose when they believed speaking would cost them more than watching. So Elliot did not let the company issue the usual empty apology. He wrote the statement himself. It was short. "The Belmont Grand failed a guest and a child last night. The fact that the guest was me does not make the failure more serious. It only makes it impossible to ignore. We are conducting a full review of our guest refusal practices, management culture, security calls, and staff reporting protections. Our standard remains unchanged, dignity before status. We failed that standard. Now we will repair what allowed that failure to happen." The review took 6 weeks. It found more than Elliot wanted and less than he feared, which somehow made it worse. There were patterns. Guests turned away for reasons no one could explain clearly. Security called too quickly on some people and almost never on others. Employees who raised concerns under Richard were scheduled poorly, written up for minor mistakes, or quietly pushed toward resignation. Richard did not return. Derek did, but not quickly. He spent 2 months away from the desk, first suspended, then retrained, then assigned to back office work where he had to read every guest complaint from the last year and write responses that were never sent. Elliot wanted him to understand that behind every situation was a person who remembered how they were made to feel. Maya became guest services supervisor. On her first day in the role, she placed a handwritten note inside the staff room beneath the old plaque. The plaque said, "Dignity before status." Maya's note said, "If you see the line being crossed, say something before the guest has to prove they matter." 3 months later, Elliot returned to the Belmont Grand with Naomi. This time, it was late afternoon. Sunlight came through the glass doors instead of rain. Naomi wore a yellow sweater and carried Captain Bear under one arm, because some companions were not negotiable. Elliot wore a plain jacket, dark jeans, and the same quiet expression he had carried through harder rooms than this one. No one announced him. He asked Thomas not to. They stood near the far side of the lobby, partly hidden by an arrangement of white orchids, and watched the hotel work. A family entered through the revolving doors. 2 parents, both tired. 2 children, both restless. Their luggage did not match. Their clothes were clean, but worn from travel. The father looked around the lobby with the guarded expression of someone preparing to be corrected for standing in the wrong place. Maya saw them before they reached the desk. She crossed the lobby herself. "Welcome to the Belmont Grand," she said warmly. "You look like you've had a long trip. Let's get you settled." The mother's shoulders dropped first, then the father's. One of the children asked if the flowers were real, and Maya bent down to answer as if the question mattered because the child had asked it. Naomi watched closely. After a moment, she looked up at Elliot. "Is that what it's supposed to look like?" Elliot watched Maya walk the family to the desk. He watched Derek, now quieter and more careful, greet them without once looking them over for permission to be kind. He watched the father hand over a card with hands that no longer looked tense. "Yes," Elliot said. "That's what it's supposed to look like." Naomi slipped her hand into his. "So people belong before somebody says they do." Elliot smiled a little. "They do." The lobby continued around them. No applause. No speeches. No dramatic music. Just doors opening, people entering, and a staff slowly learning that welcome was not a performance reserved for the impressive. Elliot looked once at the marble floor his parents would once have crossed only through service corridors. Then he looked at his daughter and held her hand a little tighter. The measure of a place is not how it treats the powerful when everyone is watching. It is how it treats the tired, the quiet, and the overlooked before it knows who they are. If this story reminded you that dignity should never depend on appearance, like this video, subscribe, and comment your city below so we can see where you're watching from.